Welcome to the Consciously Inspired Minds podcast, where we ditch the default and live life by design. I'm your host, Mandy White, personal growth enthusiast, entrepreneur, and lifestyle coach. I host conversations with creators, entrepreneurs, healers, and educators committed to living a life of truth, intention, and connection. Understanding how to evoke their higher nature, our guests take us on a journey of what it means to embody a life of conscious inspiration, joy, impact, and service. Get ready to be inspired.
All right, everybody. Welcome to Consciously Inspired Minds. I am so excited for this episode. I have my great friend, Mandy Grenier, on today. She is a certified professional coach, an author, a speaker, and a middle school program facilitator. And I'm so excited for her to tell you more about that. So her programs include one-on-one life coaching, group coaching, and a middle school after school and parent program called Positive Impact. Hey, Mandy, how are you?
Hi, I'm great. I'm excited to be here today, Brandy.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you. And I just want to, just for our listeners, that Mandy and I met just last year and became fast friends. We met at a certification in Florida, and it was a week-long certification, a mind-body certification, if you will. And we were roommates, and this was our first time meeting live and in person, and we just became fast friends. And, you know, I just remember being like, wow, this is my soul sister, you know, when you meet those people and you know they're just going to be lifelong friends. And so we stayed up, you know, to the wee hours of the morning chatting away, and it was just a wonderful experience. And she has continued to be such a mentor and really an expander for me in my life. And all of the things that Mandy has accomplished, I have so much respect for. And, you know, really looking back through our friendship, she has given evidence to me that anything that you put your focus and attention on can be done. So I want to thank you so much, Mandy, for coming into my life, for making the impact you're making in the world, and for being here today to show our listeners and to share with our listeners how they can do it for themselves as well. So with that said, I am so curious for our listeners to know, tell us a little bit about your childhood and how you saw yourself growing up.
Yeah, great question. So I was the youngest of three growing up. I have an older sister who's 5 years older, an older brother who's 2 years older, and then there was me until I was 17. Then my parents had another child. So at 17, I became like the older sister because my older brother and older sister had already moved out, and there was a baby in the house. So I'll first tell you the first part of my childhood, which is when I was the baby. So when I was the baby, I looked up to my older brother and older sister a lot. And my older sister was very academic and very sports inclined, and, you know, was very much a high achiever and sang at church and did all these things that I was just in awe, tried to always wear her clothing, you know, and would get caught and all that good stuff. But I was in awe by her, and I wanted to be a lot like her in a lot of ways. Then I had an older brother who was more of the life of the party. So I followed in my sister's footsteps until about middle school. And then I decided that maybe following in my brother's footsteps would be a little bit more fun. So yeah.
Tell us more.
So right around middle school is when I started to shift my focus to who was my brother hanging out with. He was more the life of the party. He was having a good time all the time. He was very popular. And, you know, middle school is when you start to get very curious about attachments with your friends and your peers.
Sure.
Right?
That
You
sense
start
of
to
belonging.
pull away. Yeah,
Right.
and you start to pull away from parents. And so my brother was having way more fun, it seemed, than my sister. So I followed my brother's footsteps. Those footsteps took me down a road of, there was some fun in there, but it was very risky behavior going on. I had, you know, started drinking alcohol and partying at a young age. And then they both moved out. And then I had, you know, the second part was I became an older sister to my baby brother. But at that point, I had already pretty much seeded my way in with my friends and what I was doing. And I was starting to think about moving out of my parents' house. A, because I was 17 and I felt like I could, take on the world. And B, because there was a baby in the house and I was ready to separate myself from that. So I graduated high school at 17 and I literally moved out with a friend probably like the next week, like literally that quick. I was like, okay, I'm good. I'm out. Those years of my life was filled with a lot of socializing. I didn't go to college right after high school. I started working at various businesses. I was a bar manager and a restaurant lounge manager for many years, which also with my drinking was an issue because I was literally right smack. By the time I was 19, I was a bar manager. I wasn't
Wow.
even old enough to drink legally, but I was a bar manager at 19. So I was going through a phase in my life where risky behavior was where I was at.
Mm.
However, I also learned a lot in those years. I look back on those years in my life now, and they were the years that I learned how to survive. And I had to figure stuff out. And I got my own apartment and I had to pay my own bills. And I had to, so part of me wanting to be like, all independent meant that I was learning pretty quickly about what that really means, right? So I was figuring out how to pay my bills, figuring out how to go grocery shopping, figuring out how to, have a job that I made enough money to support myself. I traveled a little bit. So I did learn a lot of skills growing up, but I took the path of resistance to myself too, right? Like I
That's a
definitely
great way to put it. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
took the path of resistance. That's the one I was on. And so through that though, I learned a lot about myself, I guess is the point of taking the path of resistance, which I didn't think was at the time, right? I was like, I'm just having the time of my life. But really there was lots of things going on in my life that was creating what I would need to then later in my life untangle. And I think it's in the untangling that the beauty of those experiences came out for me because it was a rough road for a while. I definitely look back on those years and there's times when I'm like, oh boy, that was scary. And having a
Mhm.
teenager, I, I do sometimes project my fear onto him and I have to check myself because my son is not me. And my risky behavior is not, what he's a very different kid. He doesn't do things the same way that I did things. But I will go to those places of like, oh my gosh, he must be, XYZ. And he's not. He's doing his thing. But so it was in the untangling that I found the beauty.
Yeah. Yeah. As we usually do, we have to be thankful for all the experiences in life. It's hard at the time, especially when you're in the work of doing the untangling, it can be a little distorted. But once you're able to make your way through it, you can kind of look back and then start to connect the dots and find the beauty and find the gratitude in that. So I just want to take a moment, Mandy, and celebrate the book that you published, which is outstanding. So for everyone, I'm showing it here. Mandy's book is called Thank You, Fear. I'll Take It From Here, Learning the Language of Fear and Using It to Unlock Your Highest Potential. And I read this book in probably just a few days because I could not get enough. And I think this is a beautiful moment to share your dedication of the book as we are coming out of speaking about your younger self. And so I was brought to tears when I opened this and read it. And your dedication states, for my younger self, the version that had trouble believing that I am good enough, I am worthy enough, and I am strong enough. You are a survivor, and I am grateful for your strength. Today, I know I am good enough, worthy enough, and strong enough. Thank you for pushing through. And then you also dedicate it to your son, Merrick, and your husband, Eric. And this was very resonant with me as well because I had a similar childhood. And I was also involved in a lot of risky behavior as an adolescent as well. And now I have children of my own, and I have two daughters that are 10 and 7. And I see things through their lens now, and they are living a very, very, very different life than I lived. And I think about some of those moments and choices as I was growing up and seeing that through the eyes of my girls has in moments been a little painful for me as I'm going through the work myself, but it's given me so much gratitude to be able to pull that experience forward and know the values that I want to share with my daughters and making choices that are fully aligned to who they are and living authentically. So with that said, being on this podcast, and I'd also like to share with folks, this is our second episode of Consciously Inspired Mind, and this is a celebratory moment. Even as it was yesterday, having my first episode, I'm just so excited to share with all of the listeners what living a consciously inspired life feels like. And so, Mandy, I'm curious what living a consciously inspired life means to you.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think for me, it's a lot about the narrative in my mind. So, what I mean by that is when I was the survivor that I wrote about there in the book, and just as a side note, I could never read that part out loud. In fact, when I had my manuscript and I tried to read that out loud to my husband, I sat and sobbed. And so when I hear people read that, I feel that feeling again of just the gratitude I have for that younger version of me. And it brings me back to the power and strength I didn't realize then that I had within me, but I was struggling at the time. So,
And I
um,
think that's such a beautiful message to share for our audience, because this is the essence of living a consciously inspired life, is that it is within all of us. It is just paying attention, listening, reflecting, healing, so much healing to do that gets us to making those conscious choices. And as I say, ditching the default and living life by design, truly. And that it is possible and it is magnificent. And it does take work and commitment, but I think we're always so quick to ask ourselves, what is my purpose? Like, why am I here? How do I even figure out what my passion is? What does that mean? So I'd love to hear from you, Mandy. How do you even really begin to explore what inspires you?
I feel it. So,
Mm,
I remember driving around with tears running down my face, thinking, what the hell is wrong with me? Why does everybody else have it all together? And I don't know what the heck I want out of my life. I don't even know if I have it within me to create the things that I was afraid to dream about, which, I would try to do visualization and stuff. But what would happen in my head was I'd sit there and say to myself, what are you talking about? You're not going to have that. Like, you're barely holding it together. Like, what's going on here? Like, of course not. And so I never followed the path. I just kept going, of course I can't have that. No, absolutely not. And the narrative in my head was constantly of shutting it down. I never allowed it to blossom and grow. So when I got to a place of trusting just a little bit of my inner voice, the one that said, you are good enough. But I would immediately go like, oh, what are you talking about? How can you say that I'm good enough when I haven't, checked this box and I haven't, done this perfectly right? And, my clothes still need this and I don't know, if I have this, then I'll be that, right? Like that whole narrative that I used to have, it was like very much conditional.
right.
And I have this job, XYZ, I will be successful. When I
Yeah.
make this much money, I will be blah, 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 blah. But never did I ever say, when I sit with my hand on my heart and love myself fully, will I finally feel all that I'm longing for?
Mhm.
I never once said that. There was always this extra outside stuff that I felt like I could never achieve. But it was when I actually went within and believed and listened and connected deeply with myself that changed. That narrative completely changed from when I have this, then I'll be that. It was when I'm here with myself.
And I think we all live in so much judgment of ourselves too. That
Huge.
negative self-talk is so destructive. And when we're in that comparison mode and in the era that we're, that everything is so readily available to us, to get that instant gratification now, we almost have become programmed to expect, how can I get that instant gratification in all ways, in all areas of my life? And we all know, we've all have heard, there are no shortcuts. There is no overnight success. And if you are someone out there who feels stuck, who feels that they know that they're not in the right place in life, they're not in the right job, they're not in the right marriage, they're not in the right relationships, they're not in the right family dynamic, whatever the case may be, take time for yourself to get still, to slow down, and as Mandy said, to listen, and to start to reconnect to yourself. And it really just, for me, I believe it starts there, is taking moment of pause and moving into a sense of being versus doing. And I see people every day hustling, just trying to get through the day and trying to survive and trying to get all of the things marked off their to-do list and trying to be everything to everyone and not giving themselves the time, not giving themselves the self-care and the self-love. What are your thoughts on that?
It's actually bringing up a lot about, I work with kids, right? Part of what I love to do. It's part of my passion. And yesterday I was just with my group and I asked them to reflect on the time that they've spent with me and the program and what they are taking away from it. And they have never been given the skill set of changing the narrative.
Sure.
And so when I explained to them that our brains are wired by default, right, for fear to survive, like we are wired that way.
Biological, yes.
Yeah.
Right.
We're constantly looking to make sure that we just stay alive, right? Mm-hmm. And so when I talk to them about, roughly there's, some research out there that we have about 60,000 thoughts per day. And 80% of those thoughts are negative because it's the trying to keep ourselves safe, right? Making sure that we stay alive. And out of those 80% of the negative thoughts, 95% of those are repetitive. So what comes up for me is that I spend a lot of time with kids normalizing the fact that they have a lot of negative thoughts. But giving them the toolbox on what we need to do for ourselves in order to change the narrative, because we have to build up, tell them it's like building up your muscles, right? Your strength. You've got to build up your resiliency and have the tools so that you can flip the script on those thoughts. And I teach them how to do that. Like we would teach, we talk about this stuff with adults, but there's like this whole skip of not learning it when you're younger. And then as you get older, you're kind of expected to just know that, to go within, right? But we don't have the skill set or, the lead up to that. It just kind of happens. One day you break and you fall to the floor and you're everything is coming out of you. Right. And you're like, what do I need to do in order to heal? And then you start to find your way, right? But I think that's why I'm so passionate on working with kids, because if we start this at a younger age and they actually have a toolbox and they understand that getting still means going within and trusting ourselves, like that's huge. And it's really far away for a lot of people. Like you said, a lot of people are like, they're very distant from the going within. And we're so distracted in our society today. And it's like there's so much coming at us all the time that it's really difficult for a lot of people without the tools, because we don't have the tools, right? We're not like just like, here's what you're going to do when you feel like you are, unwinding and you need something. These are some things you can do. So we don't have the tools. So we are walking around with a completely distracted world and trying to put the pieces together. And yet they never really seem to fit. And we think that because those pieces don't fit, we don't fit.
Mm,
That's not the truth. The truth is you always fit. You always have fit. You were born worthy. You were here on this earth worthy and enough as you are. But
yeah.
our society, our world around us, our culture is very stimulated all the time. And so we have to build within our toolbox ways that we can come within. And when we hear the narrative, we learn how to work with it and listen to it. And when it says things that are undesirable things, which happens most of the time, as I just said, when they go through the research on thoughts, how are we going to look at it and then give ourselves compassion so that we can then work with it? And what do we want to do with it? We're hearing in our head, you're not good enough, you're not worthy enough, you're not perfect enough, you're never going to have that job, blah, 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 all that stuff, right? Becoming aware of it. Like you said, like it's all about awareness. Right now, I'm aware of hearing this voice in my head, my critic, my inner critic, who's there to keep me safe so that I don't go and expand and do something wild and crazy, like live this amazing life. So, like, what do I want to do with it? And when you teach that to kids, like they go, boom, oh my gosh, like that's so cool. Like I can flip the script, I can change that narrative. So that's just what comes up for me is like the earlier we learn this stuff, like it just feels like there's so many other pathways,
Yes.
you know, and there's so many direct ways back to you. But, it took me until I was, in my 40s, right, to start the U-turn to go back to me as I was leading off on a distracted path. So,
Yeah. And I think that's amazing work that you do, Mandy. And I certainly want to take a deeper dive into this program that you run called Positive Impact. But just something I want to mention is what's so amazing about what you do. And I have a connection for this as well, because part of the impact I want to make in the world is that generational change. And I think about it a lot with my two daughters and how they are living a life of intention and awareness and consciousness, and authenticity is so important in this house. And so, to your point, we get to a place of burnout and true suffering before we realize that we need to go inward and really understand how we got where we are and how we, again, make that U-turn and give ourselves compassion in order to choose again. So tell us more about the positive impact and how that got started for you in your coaching practice.
yeah. Well, it all really started when I stayed home with my son, Merrick, when after he was born, I quit my job, which I thought I was going back. And I decided, no, I'm not. I'm staying home with my son. So I was home with him for 4 years. And then we went and, started looking at different preschools. And we found this really cute school for him. And he started preschool, and I went back to go find a job. And nothing ever really felt like it was fitting right. I was longing to be with him, and I was also like changing. Like I didn't want to be in the kind of hustle bustle career world, but I didn't know really where I wanted to be. So I started volunteering at the school, which led to me getting hired because I was there all the time. So they were like, you might as well just work here. I had no idea I wanted to work with kids, none whatsoever. But it's so natural now for me. So anyway, I worked at the school for 11 years and I built a lot of relationships. But when I first started working there, I would stay away from middle school because I was like, oh, my middle school experience, not so good. So no, probably don't want to hang out in middle school. And it was awkward and I didn't know how to talk to the kids. And I was like, I'm going to stay away from them. When my son became a middle schooler, I was spending more time up there because I did admissions marketing and communication. So I was up there talking to the kids, taking photos, whatnot. And I built some really great bonds with them. And I found them so fun and interesting and just awesome to be around. They gave me the energy. So after my son Merrick graduated from that school, it's preschool to eighth grade, I stayed for a little bit longer and then I decided to move on. So it wasn't until recently, while I've been doing my coaching work, that, I've been doing a lot of work around talking to people about when they first started to feel that feeling and things like that. And it's always, back to our childhood, right? And I started listening to a lot of different, reading different books and audiobooks and whatnot. And Dr. Daniel Siegel is a fantastic psychologist, and he is at like UCLA. And I started listening to his book called The Whole Brain Child and around mindsight. And I really love working with kids a lot. The more I was listening and the more I was thinking, I was like, I just want to be with them. So I just said, I'm going to write a curriculum and we're going to start just 5 weeks. Let me just give me 5 weeks with
Wow.
them. Just give me 5 weeks with them. I had 13 students sign up.
And is this an after school program?
Yeah, so it's
Okay.
after school. So it was 13 kids after school from 3:30 to 5.
Okay.
And I started off with some of the basic concepts that I learned in coaching school. And I explained it to them and I had them act out things. So we started with like a thought loop, right? And like the cognitive behavioral thinking, the way that the wheel kind of works, right? So your thoughts tell us basically our emotions, and then the emotions to the behavior to the outcome, right? So I just put that on the board. And we did what we call problem solving around that. So we had 2 students come up and one of them had a thought, this person didn't let me sit next to them at lunchtime. And so my thought is that Sally doesn't like me because she didn't let me sit next to her at lunchtime. So we wrote it on the board next to the T. Thought, Sally doesn't like me. I had him write it right out, right? How are you feeling? And then she would say, I feel sad. I feel really sad because I thought she was my friend and now I don't know what to do. Okay, so we feel sad. So we did sad. So I was doing this with the kids and they started working out their own stuff, right? And they were like, this is awesome because now I can totally get that, like, this is my thought, this is my emotion. So I was bringing them through it, and then we did different outcome. What would a different outcome be? And they would give me a different outcome, and we'd work the wheel backwards all the way to the thought, right? And then we got into narratives, and I thought this was the most interesting piece of it, is that our brain wants to close the loop, right? So a stories are, ancient storytellers we are, right? Like we've always told stories. What happens is when we start a story, our brain wants to fill in the loop of the story. It wants the answer. It will go into logic mode and it'll be like, oh, if Sally didn't sit next to me, she doesn't like me, right? It needs to close the gap. And if you watch, any movie or any book, right? There's the hero finds the guide, has some major conflict, right? And comes to okay, great. It's the same
journey.
the hero's journey, right? And it's the same thing with the kids. They will tell me. We'll go right through it, and I'll ask them, okay, so tell me now who, and then where did you go? Oh, I went over to Anna because Anna made me feel better. Okay, so she's your guide, and where's Anna taking you? And we would do this whole thing. But what they were learning is that they were creating a story and that they had a whole narrative, right? So then I would ask the group, what could be another story? And they would give me all sorts of stories. Sally was tired that day. Sally didn't even realize it. So then we would go back and say, how true do you think that could be? And well, that could be true. Could it be true or truer than, and we would bring some of the Byron Katie work into it. Is it true or truer?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And they would say like, it could be true or truer. Great. So now what do you think? Well, I want to change my thought. Oh, okay. And I would just let them, they guide the whole thing. I'm going to change my thought. Okay, cool. And then they would change their thought. Sally and I didn't sit next to each other today because Sally chose to sit with someone else. And I chose to sit with someone else. Okay, how did you feel? It made me feel great that I was making new friends. Oh, okay. And then so what was the behavior? Sally and I connected at recess time and we ran around and played. Okay, cool. And what's the outcome? We made a plan. Tomorrow, Sally and I are sitting together, but we're inviting our other friends too.
Amazing.
Okay, completely different.
Amazing.
Right? And so we did that multiple times and they loved it. They were acting it out. They were playing with it. So that was really fun. So that became really fun. And then, I started to just actually use that wheel to take them through it. So then the next thing we focused on was emotions. And we went into how our body feels so that we could and then we could go right into their nervous system. And they created the tools, their own tools of what they want to use to calm themselves.
And let's be there for a minute, Mandy. I think that is so important, is really to move out of our heads and into our bodies. And we're just, especially our generations, and of course the generations before us, that wasn't something that was really talked about a lot, if ever. And so talk to me more about how you get these kids on board between mind, body, and how to get grounded and connected.
Love this question. And I wish you could be with me in the room, because when I ask children, tell me how you feel in your body right before you get on stage. All these kids at this school, they all do theater, they all do poetry, they all have to get on stage multiple times a year. Okay. How do you feel right before you get on stage? I'll have one student go, "Oh my gosh, I get like this wicked pit in my stomach, and I feel like I might have to use the bathroom." Right. And I'm like, "Oh, okay, yeah, yep, that's one way." And then another one will be like, "I get dizzy. I get dizzy and I start to tell myself like I'm gonna forget my lines." And then all of a sudden I put myself in a panic attack, and then I start to shake. And they tell me they are so open. But what else we're doing in the room, which is the beautiful part that happens, is that we are normalizing the experience, that
Yeah.
it is okay. And our bodies are telling us something, right? So then I can ask them, "So what do you think your body is telling you when that's happening?" And there's all different things, right? Like that I shouldn't get on stage, right? But there's always this thought. They come around to, because I've already done the narrative with them. So they're kind of now thinking like, what am I telling myself and what's true or truer, right? So one of the students said to me, "You know what I think it is?" And I was like, "What? Tell me." She's like, "All right, well, my hands get sweaty and then my face gets hot and it turns red. And then I'm like embarrassed to get up there because now I'm all red in the face." And I'm like, "Yeah, totally. Yeah, I get that. I've been there, done that. Tell me more." And she's like, "But at the end, I feel so good about myself. I think it's about growing."
Wow. Wow.
Okay, 12-year-old
Yeah.
awesome kiddo, right? Tell me
Mm.
more. And so then we have this whole dialogue, but they are actually bringing these things up and connecting mind and body with kids. They can feel it because they oftentimes, and they'll tell you this, right? I won't tell people when I'm feeling this way because I know nobody can see it.
Mhm.
So I'll know if I'm worried about taking a test because I'll feel it. And then I'll say, "Well, what do you do when you feel that way?" And they will give me so we start the toolbox. So then I start a toolbox. "Tell me what you do when you feel this way. Tell me, tell me, tell me." And they'll start telling me. I go in the bathroom and I put cold water on my hands. "Oh, okay, cold water on your hands." I write it all down. They create this beautiful toolbox. I do breathing techniques. I focus in on one object and look through it. It's amazing how many survival basic skills are built into us, but we don't always use them for the purposes of what we think. We just do it and we're like, "Oh my gosh, I don't know how I got through it." But if you were doing it, consciously doing it,
Mhm.
and you had power behind it, knowing
Mhm.
like, I'm going to do my breathing right now because my breathing is going to calm my nervous system and I'm going to go back into calm, you have all the power.
So with the breathing, what other tools are in the toolbox
Yeah.
beyond breathing and getting back into the body? Because I know breathing is so important. And for instance, my daughter is 7 and she is a very sensitive little girl. She's an empath and she can get highly emotional. And in those moments, and we had an incident yesterday, just yesterday, and she understands the breathing and calming down her body. So we'll sit quietly. But yesterday, I even put my hand on her heart. It was just kind of like gently rubbing as I was talking softly to her around, it's okay. I understand you're feeling this way. What can we do? Those sort of things. So when these children are in the moment, and because we do tell our kids, I think breathing is one of the things. It's like, okay, take a deep breath. The kids hear that a lot. So, how do you continue to kind of elevate them from breathing into other tools that they can use to get back into their bodies? I'm really curious. I would love to know.
Yeah. Well, one of my students said he likes to take his shoes off and run outside.
Ah,
And having the ground, the feeling of the grass on his feet is
yeah,
something that calms him.
yeah.
I thought that was really interesting and cool, right? Like grounding, like literally grounding into the earth. Like he
Okay.
just intuitively did it, right? But if he knew, like when we started talking about it, he was like, "Oh, that's so cool. I just did that because it just felt right. Like,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. But we started talking about it. So, and I had another student tell me that she likes to doodle because it takes her mind out of whatever is going on. So whatever's creating that activation for her, she likes to doodle. So she will doodle designs and just color in on a piece of paper. And she's like, I do that in class because if we're talking, about something, or if I'm getting ready to take a test and I start to feel something or something, I can just doodle on my Great. Another student I actually taught this technique to is the mini meditations with your fingers. So you can actually rub your fingertips together to feel the ridges, because you start to focus on feeling ridges in your fingertips and it takes you out of your mind. So what we're really trying to do is get them. So Dr. Danielle Siegel does this upstairs brain and downstairs brain. So I teach them about the upstairs brain, downstairs brain, which is going from the inner part of your brain where the amygdala is, right? And that would be the downstairs part of your brain. So that's where it's always kind of looking for fear. So we have checkers, we have fear checkers, right? They're always looking around. Your fear checker's looking and it sees something and I go, oh, that's a dirty look from my friend, right? And I'm working with middle school here, so that comes up often. Oh, that must mean, and then you got, one of your characters that we have in our head. They create their own characters, but they've got like anxious Annie start stomping around and going, oh my goodness, this must mean that, right? And then we've got fearful Fred who's like, oh, what's going to happen if I get pushed out? And the kids all act this out. So it's kind of fun. So they learn about the downstairs brain. This is all the reactions that are happening in their brain because they haven't been thought checked. So then there's a staircase that goes to the upstairs part of the brain. The upstairs part of the brain is the prefrontal cortex. Okay. So it's the logic part. And it checks the checker and says, that's actually just your friend looking in your direction, trying to look at the clock. No big deal. Go ahead. We're going to send the signal back down that says shut down the anxious Annie part. There's nothing going on here. And fearful Fred, you can take a nap. You're done. This is just, she's just looking. And it helps them with the narrative, right? Because then they go, if I go upstairs into logic, what would that be? What's the narrative that I would put there, right? And so when we can help them regulate up and down the staircase, then they can then decide, am I going to go freak out with Fred or am I going to go to the logic piece? Now, what happens is when we get into the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, right? The staircase, there's a baby gate is what we talk about with the kids. So this is upstairs, downstairs brain. The baby gate closes. And so the signals aren't going up and down anymore.
Okay.
Right? And they're stuck in downstairs brain.
Yeah.
And so their signals have stopped. So this is where the tools come in. Because in order to open the baby gate, to get the signals back up and down again, we need to calm our body. We need to calm the nervous system so that fearful Fred and anxious Annie start to chill. And so when they start to chill, then we can start to get the signals back up to the upstairs part of their brain.
Start to get the clarity back. Yes.
But they also learn that the upstairs part of their brain is not fully developed and it won't be until they're in their 20s. So this is where I bring in the self-compassion piece. So right now we have parts of our roof in the upstairs part of our house, it's the upstairs part, that are not fully finished yet. And maybe some of the windows aren't in there yet. And maybe we haven't laid down the rug yet. And we haven't put in, the beautiful built-in, piece up there. So we don't quite have all those things yet. And so the tools that we're going to use are going to help us, but we have to come back to our heart and give ourselves some self-compassion and remind us that we love who we are and that we're just right now working with anxious Annie and fearful Fred, but we're going to make it through this and we're going to be okay. And just having those tools in place for them, oftentimes they can start to go, oh, I'm in my downstairs brain right now. And I'm having trouble with my upstairs brain because it's not fully built, but I'm going to do the best I can to start to calm my nervous system so that I can reconnect with it because I'm feeling disconnected right now. The interesting thing is, though, Brandy, is that while I'll do all this work with the children, what I have found is that I need to bring the parents on board.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So and this is where kind of the coaching skills that have come in with me coaching adults has been helpful because I'm
Okay.
taking pretty big concepts with the kids because they're trying to figure these things out. And even though they have a lot of touch points on how to use these things, they don't, sometimes the concepts are really big. So what I do with the parents is after I have a lesson with the child, after I have a lesson with the child, I'll send home my lesson plan. So I say, hey, parents, this is what I worked on today with your child. We did upstairs brain, downstairs brain. Here's a little video to watch. This is where I got the lesson from. This is what we talked about. And this is, we act things out or whatnot. But what's happening is now they can have some language around it. Plus they're learning. They'll like write back and go, I had no idea that's
Sure.
because I've been feeling this my whole life and I didn't know what to do. But now they have context. They have something to talk about with their child. And when their child then goes into one of the downstairs brain states, they then have some context to talk with them. How are you feeling? Are you in the downstairs brain right now? What can we help you do in order to get you, some communication with the upstairs brain, right?
Yes.
And be built in. And it might be sitting down and just rubbing them and bringing them back down to a place where they can then connect with the parts that in their upstairs brain that are built in.
Yeah. And it sounds like that really allows an opportunity for these kids to begin to really integrate these tools. And then it becomes part of their daily practice as opposed to just, it's something that they learned that day. But how do we make this integration something that they take with them for years to come? And it sounds like such a digestible program. And you had mentioned that this is a 5-week program. Is that right?
Yeah. So in the 5-week program, I thought I would just start with, I'm like, in 5 weeks, I can teach them a lot, right? So I was like, I'm going to just start with the thoughts, the emotions, the behavior, and the outcome. So we did the thoughts, and then we did the behavior. We did the emotions. And then when we got to the behavior, they were like, we have some questions, like we have some ideas. And I was like, oh yeah, what's going on? What's happening? And they were like, well, so like say you're with a friend and they do something and then they really hurt your feelings. Like, how do you forgive them? Awesome, right? They're opening up. They're telling me what their
curiosity is phenomenal.
So I said, okay, that's what we're going to work on. So I went up. They have a whole theater section at this school, and I gathered about 20 shoes. And I brought them to the classroom and I laid them all on the floor. And I had seen this somewhere else. And I thought, we'll see how this works. Laid them on the floor. I had them all pick a pair, just one shoe, pick one shoe. And then they wrote a story about the day in the life of the shoe or the person who wore the shoe. And I had tiny little shoes all the way up to, what would have looked like maybe a grandparent's shoe, right? And they all chose one and they all wrote a story about the shoe or the person, and then they shared it. So we started with empathy so that we could start to look at like people's, are different. And we even talked a little bit about maybe the shoe or the person in the shoe's childhood and how might they have a different perspective on things and what that might look like. And then they were like, okay, this is cool. So they started to build their empathy. And then I had remembered this other thing that I had learned one time. And I said, well, I'm going to try this. So I said, okay, now we're going to move into forgiveness. And they were like, okay, they had a good basis of empathy. And I had them all go outside and pick up a rock that represented the pain or hurt that they felt from somebody else or from themselves. So it could have been their own critic in the side, or it could have been something that somebody did to them. So I said, go pick up a rock that represents the size of the pain that you're carrying. And I had one child look at me and said, there's not a big enough rock out here.
Oh, wow.
And I said, okay, well, then pick up two that you can carry, whatever you can carry. So they all picked up rocks. They're all different sizes. I mean, one girl was carrying 2 rocks in her arms. These are middle schoolers, so she's an 8th grader. 2 rocks. Some of them had, different size rocks. I said, okay, we're going to go for a walk now. And they have a really big campus there. So we went for like a nice long walk and they're like, Mandy, these are really heavy. I'm like, all right, keep coming. So we finally got to this one spot where they have a pond. And one of the students stopped and said, I know what we're doing. And I said, what are we doing? And she said, you're making us carry this until we're ready to let it go. Yeah, I am. Are you ready to let it go? And she was like, yeah. heck yeah, I'm ready to let it go. And she threw it into the pond, and the other kids come over like, what are we doing? And they're carrying the rock. And she
Wow.
explained to them, she's like,
What a powerful exercise.
right? Because then we moved into how forgiveness is about you letting go.
Yes.
And
Yes.
not about, right? We can't make somebody else apologize to us. Like that, we don't have control over that, but we have control over what we want to carry around and then how we want to process it. So they each started processing on their own. I had one student holding those two rocks, Brandy. She looked at me and said, what if I don't know how to let them go? She's 13.
Wow.
I thought, wow, what great conversation, right? I said, well, when you know that this is about you, not about the other person, now we have to work on what you want to do for you. Let's get that into place, right? What do you want to do for you? How would you like to see yourself let that go?
Yes.
Threw him in the pond, and she was like, I think I need to think about it. I said, that's okay. You think about it. You think about it. Now, yesterday was our last of the 5 days, and I went around the room and I had them share with me their favorite thing that they did. So many of them said carrying the rocks. That was my favorite thing. And they told me, they were like, at first, I didn't like it at all. I was so mad at you for making us carry. But then when I realized it's about how much I want to carry, it was so much better after that. Because now I know, like she's told me, she's like, I started questioning myself when something would happen. I'd be like, how much of this do I want to carry? Like, I want to have this conversation with my friend and let him know that it wasn't okay what they said or did. But then I need to move on for me because it's not about letting your friend off the hook. You can still hold them accountable for their behavior, but if you're going to carry the rock, you got to be ready to carry the rock, and what's grudges and whatnot. So that was the really cool thing, is it started out as a 5-week program, and now they're like, can you come back after break? There's so much more we want to discuss now. And I'm like,
Wow, that's incredible. So through this 5 weeks, and a few things that just came up for me when you were taking us through that was how these kids are learning to prioritize themselves, which is, such a struggle for so many folks, is finding time for ourselves and giving ourselves that self-love, that self-care, et cetera. So, prioritizing self, and then also knowing how to create boundaries. And that is tied to prioritizing the self and knowing that we can't give away what we don't have. So for these kids, making sure that they're getting their needs met. And what's so interesting to me is, especially the world that we're in today, these kids not fully expressing how they're feeling. And the fact that you are, to your point, normalizing what is happening for them. That way they do have a sense of belonging. And the fact that they're in the classroom doing these exercises with a group of 12 other children, is so powerful. And what a bond, I'm sure, that is for them. And then just that group, if nothing else, just being in that group with one another is a sense of belonging just by itself.
yeah,
And being able to be fully expressed in that moment and having someone to really see and hear them is, such a gift. And so at the end of these 5 weeks, what are some takeaways in this program? What are some outcomes? What is the output of these 5 weeks?
yeah. One thing I will say, I am so proud of having 13 students and having it mixed gender, because they listen to each other and they're not put in different groups, right? It's not like the boys group and the girls group. For me, it was important that they sat together and that they listened to each other and they got a sense of different perspectives and what that means. So I would say, a huge takeaway for me was that, first of all, given the opportunity, children will tell you the areas that they are curious about learning. You brought up boundaries. They asked me, can we now discuss boundaries? Because now that we understand all of these things, and now that we understand of how to let go, how do we now set boundaries to honor ourselves and honor, because we talked about when we're setting boundaries, we're also honoring the other person, right? How do I honor myself and honor them? that's why they want to keep moving, because there's more and there's more and there's more. And giving them the opportunity to say what they want to learn, because they are the ones that they need it for themselves, right? And they know they need it. And they've also told me, when we were younger, we didn't really need this stuff because adults pretty much figured everything out for us, right? But now that we're older, I need to know how to talk to my friend without going to get a parent or an adult, because like that's not like cool anymore, right? We're not going to go around and get, parents all the time. We're getting ready for high school. Like, we need to know what we want to say and who we are and what we're going to accept and what we're not going to accept. And for me, that was just so awesome and beautiful that they know intuitively, intrinsically, they know what they need. But there's always so much of like, this is what you're going to get, and this is how we're going to teach you, and this is what it's going to look like.
Right.
And I thought like I needed to go there with a 5-week program. 5 weeks is not that long, right? But I thought I need to have week 1, like this in a box, week 2. And what I found was that allowing them to steer the ship and to just allow it to flow for them, they got so much more out of it. And that's what it's all about, right? Like, what are they going to take away from it?
Right.
And giving them the opportunity to discover and decide where they wanted to go with it. So being flexible with their needs and working with them and honoring that. Like, they loved that they had a lot of control in it. It gave them power in what we were doing and ownership. They built their own bulletin board, and they had stuff all over their bulletin board. And I had one student yesterday say to me that her biggest takeaway was that even if the students could not be in the program, they were walking by that bulletin board, and what they learned about subconscious beliefs, she knows that they are picking up things as they walk by. And that to her was important. And I think that's cool, because she gets that, they're picking things up, even if they're not, necessarily standing there or carrying it around, they're getting it. And that was important to her. So I think giving them the autonomy of learning through their curiosity is the biggest takeaway that I got from that program.
Yes.
And we'll continue, because that's the beauty.
And so much more coming from this as you progress. It sounds like as you progress through facilitating more of these programs, you'll begin to see those trends and what these kids are so curious about and what they're really yearning for and needing and asking for. And what a beautiful way also to give them a place to be empowered, first and foremost, but then giving them agency and space to be creative and playful and honoring one another at the same time. So after the 5 weeks of the program, what happens next? Have you thought about that? Now I know this is kind of like, sounds like it was a pilot of this magnificent idea you had around bringing this work to children. So what are your thoughts from here?
Well, I have some really big aspirations now.
I'm sure you do.
Which, before we were on, we were I was telling you about passion, right? And like how when it shows up, like you feel it, right? Like there's this feeling in my gut. And part of me is like, am I healing my middle schooler? Right? My inner middle schooler by working with middle schoolers.
Interesting.
I am like,
wow.
I can't explain the feeling. Like, it makes me emotional. It's like, I walk in that room and I'm like, this is where I'm supposed to be.
Wow.
And they're so awesome. Like, even yesterday, when we were done, I'm going to show you the t-shirt I gave them. So we had a dance party at the end.
Okay.
I let them do karaoke and they picked all these different songs. We had a dance party. But I gave them all these t-shirts. That's my logo.
Oh, Mandy, wow. So for the listeners, so it's a blue t-shirt and it says positive impact on the front. The O of positive is a smiley face. And tell us what the jumping to,
Yeah. So it's like a bouncing ball, right?
Okay.
Like,
okay. I see. Yes, I see it now. Yes.
So it's like the bouncing ball from like learning. And I was thinking about it as like as you're learning, you're growing. And as you're growing, you're elevating, right? So, we learn. And when we learn, we bounce and we bounce and we bounce and we bounce. And then, we elevate, right? So like the bounce goes a little bit higher. So the kids were so great. So they're put on their shirts and they're doing this like dance party, which was so much fun. And I think, people were walking by, there was staff walking by watching them and whatnot. But for me, it was that moment of like, this is one of those moments as a kid that you have that imprints in your mind
Yes.
of a positive experience in middle school with your peers, having fun, learning, understanding new tools. That whole group now understands new tools, right? And they treat each other with their new tools and they treat themselves with their new tools. And it's part of the ripple effect. And so while I'm standing there listening to them sing loudly as they can on the path, and I'm just, yeah, like, what a cool experience for fun with each other and be more understanding of each other at such a young age. It's pretty impactful. And I think that's like that passion piece for me. And that's what brings up the emotion for me is watching them and seeing play. It just gives me this beautiful sense of like this is what I'm meant to do. Like this is it. Like this doesn't get any better. Like and it's all just happening organically without forcing it, without trying to make it be. And I'm not trying to make it be anything. I'm actually allowing the river to flow. And like you said, the more that I do it, the more I'm going to see, start to see patterns, right?
Sure.
Because kids are, they're all kids and they're all growing up and they're all learning and they're all trying to figure it out. And they're all just trying to go down this stream to get somewhere. And there will be things that will bubble up. And the things that will bubble up will be part of the pillar of the program, right? But allowing them to navigate down the river, through the pillars, around the pillars, where they want to go with it, is what I see long-term with this. And then how do I replicate it in a way that other people could do it in their communities? And not only that, but the other piece of this that I'm really excited about is creating the parent modules. So when your student is in lesson 1, week 1, the pillar that week will be about XYZ, right? And they can take a path around the pillar. The kids can, as part of their training or their learning, but the parents will get a module that will match the learning pillar of that week for the kids.
And how to help the child integrate, or
Yes,
also
exactly.
teaching a parent, and not so much of an elementary way, what their child is receiving. Okay.
And then what I would love to see out of that is it become a community for parents so that they can then go into this community, an online community, where there's parents around the country, the world that have just, they're learning this too. And they can talk about it. Like, these are some things that came up for me. And how did this work for you? And, and they can start to make connections with other parents. And then I have, this beautiful dream which it's part of my vision, that there will be an app that is for caregivers. And as parents of your kids, you could send a link to a caregiver and have them watch a video on some social emotional things, answer some questions. You get the response and it says like, this is a good fit, right? Like, Sally is a good fit for your family because she also has understanding around social emotional needs of children. So I see it as being a lot bigger, than it is right now. But when I'm standing in that room with those 13 kids, I'm like, this is the beginning of something really awesome. And it started right here with these kids.
Wow. Such a big moment for you, Mandy. I know just through this year, this awesome year we've known each other, and the evolution. I know we were talking about this earlier before we jumped on, the evolution of now being able to kind of our healing, of our journey, and now kind of looking back and beginning to connect the dots is the reward, for all of the work and the patience it takes and the exploring, and again, that there is no overnight success or shortcuts to this, and to really embracing how you follow your bliss.
Yeah.
And really, that's what it's about. That's why we're here. We're here to follow that bliss, to expand, to make impact, I love this quote by the poet Rumi, which is, we're all just walking each other home.
Mhm.
We're all just walking each other home. And what a beautiful way to teach these kids at such a critical age of their development that they do belong and that they do have the tools, and to normalize their emotions as opposed to them feeling in comparison, especially with all of the information that they have readily available to them through social media. Because, gosh, taking ourselves back to middle school, there was none of that. In the comparison and the self-doubt, the negative self-talk, all of those things were so heightened at that time. So the support that you're giving these kids is just phenomenal. And I cannot wait to hear more about it. So are you thinking about starting another program soon? Will you be repeating the same 5-week moving forward and then continuing to expand on these pillars?
Yeah. So the kids would really like me to come back after break. So I'm going to kind of look at that and see, like, where would they like to go with it? And I do see this as a much longer program. In fact, I'm talking to that school about starting in the fall and potentially going throughout the entire school year, and just having it be, different kids can come in at different times. So maybe it's a cohort that happens at for the first couple of months, and then I have a different cohort in the next part of it. I do see it as being a longer program. I happen to have a really close connection with the school, so I'm able to kind of pilot it there and kind of work out some of the kinks and whatnot. But I do see this as then me being able to have a nice packaged kind of product that I can then go to another school and say, hey, I've run this over here and this is what it looked like. I do see it being a bigger thing. But like you said, like sometimes it comes out of left field. Like
Right.
you're not, I did not think there was never a time before that I thought I'd be working with kids. Before I started working at Merrick School, I was never like, oh, I can't wait to work with kids. If anything, I was like, I don't ever want to work with kids.
Right.
So it can come out of left field and just kind of take you by surprise and, and run with it. Like, okay, here we go. This is what we're doing. Okay. All right.
So a few things that I'm curious about. Well, first, I just want to make a comment because this really takes me to an opportunity for the parent and the child to find a deeper connection. For instance, a good friend of mine, her daughter isn't always fully expressive on how she's feeling. And the mother is very aware and continues to ask the daughter questions. What happened today? How are you feeling? And the daughter's just kind of quiet about it. And she will eventually tell her mom, oh, something happened today. Maybe at the end of the day, right before bed or something, her daughter will like, oh, something happened today. And then the mom's like, okay, but the friend of mine, the mom, she's like, I, sometimes feel like I don't know what she's thinking and I don't know what's going on. And that can be concerning for a parent when a child isn't as vocal and expressive. So a program like this would give the parent opportunity to know more about what is going on in the mind of the child. Tell me a little bit more about honoring that dynamic of sharing what's happening with these kids and sharing that with the parent, what's happening with these kids. If there's something that you think is critical for them to know. I know you had mentioned that you send the lesson plan home that evening as to what they worked on. How do you share some of the ideas and thoughts that those individual children had shared that day with the parent? Any thoughts there or ideas? I know this is very new, so maybe you're still kind of sussing all of that out, but I think that there's great opportunity there as well.
Yeah. So this is new and I am sussing it out. However, I have one-on-one coached with middle schoolers before, and I keep confidentiality with the student unless it is something that is dangerous or
Okay.
that something that needs to be brought to the parent's attention. But I do try to honor the space with the child if they are not, if it's like, Sally gave me a dirty look today, and then we work through it and we go through the thought looping and everything. And if everything comes through and they're like, yeah, you know what? I think I was kind of overthinking that one a bit, right? I don't necessarily reach back out to the parent and say, this is what she said, and this is what's going on, and this is why. I leave that with us. And I have that conversation with the parent, though. I have a coaching agreement with the parent that unless it's something that is dangerous behavior that I don't like, I feel is unsafe, then I wouldn't bring it up.
Sure.
But if it's something that I feel is, unsafe, or I would be referring them out, absolutely. And I have had conversations with parents. Parents have asked, like, hey, can I catch up with you? I want to bring you into loop on something, because kids don't share everything with their coach either, right? There's certain things, right, that they're not going to share. So I have had meetings with parents who have wanted to bring me up to date on things that's going on, which has been helpful sometimes because I'm not there all the time. Like, they're going to share.
Yeah.
So I think having that open communication with the parents. Now, with this particular program, I haven't sussed out what that might look like, but my thought is around that is kind of the same as with the coaching, is that I want the kids to have that space to share within the group what they're thinking and feeling. But that's, I think, is a big reason why I want the parents to also go through the program, because my hope is that there will be dialogue. It will have open up dialogue, so that when they're at home and they say, oh my gosh, when I was doing week 2 with positive impact, I didn't realize, the upstairs, downstairs part of the brain or whatever. What did you get out of that? Maybe the kid will be like, nothing, because they don't want to talk about it, because that's typical of that age too. Like they're trying to figure out where they are within the family dynamic and within their, their life of their friends become their soul kind of connections, and they're trying to figure out what that means and how do I communicate. Or you might have a kid who says, oh my gosh, no kidding, right? Like, I'm starting to feel this way and I didn't know and I didn't understand and I was afraid to tell you because I didn't want you to worry. But now that I know that my peers, I had a parent reach out to me and say that one of their students her daughter didn't realize that other people were feeling the same way until she was in that room.
Wow. What an amazing thing. And that was another point I was going to make, but you had already made it around really the ultimate goal would be to create that dialogue between parent and child, because you are the one normalizing the behavior, normalizing the thought that they might be having, and then giving the child more comfort and more ease in having that conversation with the parent, because it is being normalized, because now they know other friends are feeling the same way. Amazing. There's such a need for this. There is an incredible need, Mandy, and you are completely onto something, my friend. Yes.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. I definitely feel like I'm in a different space when I'm with them. It's hard to explain, but like I said, maybe it is I'm healing my middle schooler, maybe that's part of the process for me. And maybe that's why I'm so drawn to this age group and these kids. And I can put myself in those shoes pretty quickly when I go back to my experience. And that's why when we were talking about my childhood, what did it look like? For me, a very marked time was my middle school years. Yeah. And I took a direction. I took a hard left, and I didn't have the bumpers. I didn't have any bumpers on my, on my lane for my bowling. I was, I was going all over the place.
Yeah.
But for me, it's like, if I can provide some sort of understanding for these kids and some insight for them, maybe they will be able to, and I know they will, they've already told me, there's so much that I can lean on now that I didn't have before. Right. So it's giving them the tools that can help guide them back to their North Star, to who they are, their compass of truth.
Yeah. And I just think too, as you've gone through this process and how you had said it just kind of came out of left field and I didn't anticipate this. I think this is also part of living a consciously inspired life. And this is where it can be a little tough, because we always need to know, to your point around the brain, we always need the answer. The brain is wired to get to the answer. And so we're always trying to get to the answer, as opposed to just being in process. and finding gratitude in the moment and finding connection in the moment and finding self in the moment and what we desire and what really, again, nurtures our soul. But it's important to continue to move. Just make moves. It doesn't have to be quitting your job tomorrow. It doesn't have to be getting a divorce. It can just be what are some sort of what's a bridge to the next move for the bigger thing that you know you may desire. And it doesn't have to be this huge commitment. It could be a small move. It could be something that tells our brain that we're moving in the right direction. It could be starting to write that curriculum. It could be asking ourselves, okay, well, if I do leave this job, what is making me feel reservation about not leaving, and writing those things down and really gaining perspective on what might be holding us back and what we might need to do and steps taken in order to leave that job. Just so simple things, because you have to move. And when you just sit and wait for the answer to come to you, that's when the feeling of being stuck happens. So we don't have to have the full outcome of the thing.
And I'm going to probably surprise you on this one, but here's what was going on for me when I decided to do the middle school program. I was trying to figure out what my 12-week curriculum for middle-aged women was going to be around my book. And I was like, it's going to be like this. I think it's going to be like that, kind of like this. And then I said, okay, well, what can I do right now today to just start bringing in some income so that I could get closer to my goal of doing this stuff full time? Oh, I could go do a middle school program like that because I know the kids and I know the school. And that's how I literally, and when I walked in that door, I walked in that day thinking, this is a 5-week thing. It's just going to bring in a little bit of income. I'm going to spend some time with the kids. It's going to be lovely. I haven't been here in a while because I used to work there and I wasn't working anymore. It's not going to be any big deal. And literally has shifted me. And I felt it. I knew it. I was like, oh no, like I belong here. Like this is different. This is the universe setting something up for me to get my butt in this door, to be standing in front of these kids, to be teaching them these lessons and like talking to them openly about how they're thinking and feeling. And yes, I still love working with middle-aged women and I love my book and I love all that stuff. But this is like a passion that's pulling me through that it's like the chicken or the egg, right? For me, I'm like, do I work with the adults and help them process and peel back the layers of the onion? And knowing that most of this work is starting from childhood, or do I work with the kids and then help them? And I was like, well, wait a minute, I could do both. Like, let's do both and connect the two together so that they can be having conversations that is, like you were saying, generational change, right? Like, it's directly the parent is getting the education and the knowledge. The child is too. And now it's changing the way that they act and interact with each other and their, experiences.
And giving these parents the vernacular because, I feel so grateful that I'm in this work to then share with my daughters, to normalize for them, to make sure that they have a diverse way of thinking when they're in a situation that is unfamiliar to them or uncomfortable for them, and how to give other children compassion. All of these things, it's because it's what we teach, what we've needed the most in our own lives, as they say. And so as I'm having these conversations with my girls, it's so satiating for me as well, because I wanted someone to tell me that. Like, I wanted someone to tell me these things. And so now that I have an opportunity to do it myself, it's such a gift. And my kids have been such expanders for me, as I've mentioned. So that's beautiful. I look forward to seeing what's next, Mandy. That's just incredible, incredible work. And again, you're so focused on your desires and coming from a place of true authenticity. And I think that, really, it's so easy for us to say, just trust yourself. You have to, we were having this discussion on another episode of it's so important to just trust yourself. But I think there's some work to be done before you can begin to trust yourself and trust the process and trust the timing of your life. Because we are trying to get to the answer. But before we can fully embody the trust, it's going back here into the past, potentially spending some time understanding where we need to heal that got us to the limiting beliefs, exchanging those beliefs for new ones, feeling more confident, feeling more empowered, then feeling in alignment to the things that are calling our attention, making some moves, no matter how big or small, keeping that momentum, and realizing the self-care, realizing the boundaries that are needed in your life that will then give you space and access to release something, to bring something else in. Whenever we're releasing something, we're giving space for something else to come in. And the last point I want to make is being unattached to the outcome, because this is a beautiful example of that. As you were sitting down, doing the curriculum, having this idea about supporting women through your book, and then having this idea around, okay, I need some additional income here to support what these desires are. And then boom, something amazing happens. And you have to, and it's funny because we were kind of having this conversation on another episode as well, where you can't take all the credit because there's something bigger than be going on here. Like this is grace. These are I am being supported. The universe is supporting me. My guides are supporting me. God, source, universe, whatever you want to say. And so it's really, we're co-creating. And so we're in partnership with what's happening in our lives. I always feel like I'm in partnership with the universe. And so I know when I am in a space of when I'm too much in my head and I'm analyzing too much and I'm trying to figure it out and I'm trying to get to the answers and I'm trying to force, I know that's a moment for pause and to do the breath work, to do the meditation, to go to the yoga class, to take a walk, whatever that means for you. So, Mandy, thank you so much for sharing all of that. This has been so much fun for me. So wonderful connecting with you. And I also just want to say for all the listeners that we will put a link to Mandy's book, Thank You, Fear, I'll Take It From Here, in the show notes. She also mentioned Daniel Siegel, the author of The Whole Brain Child. We'll also put a link to that in the show notes. And Mandy, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me at my website at www.mandygrenier.com. Probably the easiest place to find me is there. I do have a Facebook community, and you can find that through my website. There's a Facebook link that you can go to, and Instagram is mandy.grenier.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time and energy and the impact that you're making in the world. Here's to living a consciously inspired life, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Till next time.
That's all for today. Thanks so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. If you'd like to learn more about Consciously Inspired Minds, you can visit us at consciouslyinspiredminds.com. Until we connect again, explore what inspires you.